Madison Square Gardens in New York, scene of this month's Democratic Party convention. Despite the noise and colour, experts were predicting that the convention would be dull. After all, there was no battle for nominations. The party was, for once, solidly behind one man. In fact, the proceedings were as raucous as ever. Sensing the chance of victory after 8 years out of the White House, the Democrats roared their support for their choice for President, Jimmy Carter. Carter's campaign advertisements 6 months ago left many Americans baffled, especially those in the northern states. Among them, the reaction was, Jimmy who for president? For in January, Carter was still an unknown name to 9 out of 10 ordinary voters. From his peanut fields in Georgia, the farmer millionaire has grown from obscurity in January to fame in July, with astonishing wins in the primaries. First at New Hampshire, then Florida, beating the old hand George Wallace, Pennsylvania, scotching the chances of Henry Jackson, and Wisconsin, where he thrashed the liberal Morris Udall. Now opinion polls put Carter ahead in the race to the White House 2-1 over the incumbent Jerry Ford. To be, he hopes, the first president from the old Southern Confederacy since the Civil War. It's an incredible performance from the candidate observers were taking least seriously. Even now, people still don't know much about Carter, the man. The hamlet of Plains, Georgia, is where Jimmy Carter was born 51 years ago. It's long been a Carter town, and it hasn't changed much over the years, except that the railway station's now his campaign headquarters. In Carter's lifetime, the population of Plains has always stayed between 600 and 700 souls, and life here belongs to the old, uncomplicated America that rarely causes a stir. Everywhere there's evidence of the Carter family and their business interests, their influence, their standing in the community. People here say the Carters are sincere, compassionate, and popular. But from Plains, Georgia, the home of 8 or 9 generations of Carters, it's a long, long way to Washington, D.C. The route to the presidential nomination started for Carter 2 years ago when he began to travel the states, listening to complaints about Watergate, Washington, and politicians. He caught the mood of the people and set about modeling his image. The blueprint, the plan of campaign, was a 70-page document drawn up by his staff to tell him just how they thought he could become president. It pulled no punches in its assessment. It said Carter had in his favor a Kennedy smile and the populism of George Wallace, without Wallace's racist reputation. But it warned him that his image lacked depth, and it advised him what to do about it. Traveling the country and meeting people was one way. Befriending famous journalists, getting his face on the covers of Time and Newsweek were others.
Roger Maris yesterday, as we played golf, and Jimmy Carter.
Carter did everything his staff advised, and according to a computer, he's covered 400,000 miles and shaken over 100,000 hands in the process.
For the cripple show. That's because of Roger Maris. Oh, get out of here, Jimmy. Thank you. Okay, Jimmy, till later.
Writing a book was yet another ploy suggested by the image builders. Carter's autobiography does all it was devised to do, boosts his qualities. He describes himself as a farmer, an engineer, a father and a husband, a Christian, a politician, a former governor, a planner, a businessman, a nuclear physicist, a naval officer, a canoeist. All in all, a complicated man leading a full life. A life, in fact, that's still a closed book to many millions of people who'll be asked to vote him into the world's most powerful office. One man who knows him better than most is Hal Gulliver, the editor of an Atlanta newspaper. We asked Mr. Gulliver to clear up one point that's worrying a lot of would-be Carter supporters. Does Carter deserve the reputation he's got of being evasive, fuzzy on major issues?
Well, you know, I find it a very interesting question as a Carter watcher, because I think the answer is yes or no. That probably sounds fuzzy enough in itself. But I think the answer is yes, that he's fuzzy on the issues. In the sense that I think Carter's political perception of this year, and I think it was an accurate perception and a profound one, was that after Watergate and after Vietnam and after a number of other things, that the primary concern of the American people, of American voters, in looking for a presidential candidate was the question of character, of honesty, of integrity, and in that sense that Carter, I mean, I don't think Carter believes the issues are unimportant, but he believes the primary issue is whether or not people believe in the candidate, in his character and his competence and all the rest. Okay, in that sense, I think he's very consciously fuzzy, that he doesn't think it's as important to spell out what kind of national health insurance plan he favors, though he says very clearly, that he favors a national health insurance plan, or how he would restructure the federal government at this point. Now, the reverse side of that, I think to some extent the fuzziness charge is a phony one, in that I and 100 other journalists who followed Carter around the country have heard him over and over and over go into great detail on many, many particular issues. I mean, he'll go, especially if he gets in, say, a college audience, and a young student wants to know what he really would do about the Middle East. He'll not only answer in detail, he'll hesitate before moving on to the next questioner, and look back at the first questioner and wait for a follow-up question in case he really hadn't been as specific as the questioner wanted him to be.
The church at Plains. Jimmy Carter's one politician who goes to church every Sunday, not just now for the cameras. For the church is his strongest inspiration. Carter's a committed Baptist who prays 5 times a day, though he denies he's ever claimed that his campaign for the presidency has the endorsement of God. It is true, though, that Carter believes he's a man with a mission. To buttress the declining standards of his country is a cherished ideal. It stems from his family's brand of religion, typically Southern.
Well, I had a great rally in Green Cove Springs right before the election.
He recalled his religious career before a gathering of churchmen in Indiana.
I, like most of you, accepted Christ as my Savior as a child. 11 years old, I was baptized in the church where my father's family had been. And when I went to the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, as an 18-year-old midshipman, I taught Sunday school for 3 years to the junior boys and girls of the enlisted men and officers who were stationed at Annapolis. And then when I went on a ship, including the submarine, on special days, I would hold religious services for the other members of the crew. When I came home from the Navy in 1953, I volunteered to be a Sunday school teacher, and later became superintendent of the department, later became a deacon in my church, later became chairman of the board of deacons, and later became head of the Brotherhood of Men's Work in 34 churches, and was very proud of my status in the church.
On his tour of America, Carter's emerged as deep-thinking and witty, with a ready sense of humor. Above all, a man who's able to put himself instantly at ease with a wide range of audiences. He went down well with black Americans, for instance. And when an audience is agreeable, he's not above spinning a yarn about his early days in Plains.
And when I was about 5 years old, during the Depression years, I first learned how to judge people. My father grew peanuts, which is a crop that I grow also. And every year during the harvest season, from July until about September when peanuts are ripe, I would go out into the fields every morning and with a little wicker, with a little homemade wagon, and pull up the peanuts out of the ground and haul them back to the yard. We didn't have running water, electricity, but I pumped water and washed them 7 or 8 times to get the dirt out of the peanuts, and then put them in salt water to soak. And then very early the following morning we'd get up and boil those peanuts. That's a delicacy of the South, is boiled peanuts. And I would put about half a pound in a paper bag, and I had about 20 bags every day, and then I had a wicker basket, and I walked about 2.5 miles down the railroad track to my nearest metropolitan area, which is Plains, Georgia. It had then about 600 people in it. It now has 683 people in it. And it was my first experience with urban life. But I had a chance, as I moved down the streets of Plains, to learn, even at that early age, who the good people were and who the bad people were. The good people were the ones that boiled peanuts for me. and the bad ones didn't. And I haven't come any further in my ability to judge other people, so I'm not here to judge, I'm here to preach.
This is Carter's other major influence, his widowed mother, known by all as Miss Lillian. She's a remarkable woman. At 77, sweet as honeysuckle, yet driven by a steely resolve. When she was 68, she left for India to do voluntary work among lepers. She said it would be a good example for her children. Naturally enough, she won't hear a word against her boy Jimmy.
Miss Lillian, may I ask you this? A lot of people seem to have a great deal of difficulty in understanding Jimmy Carter. They can't quite understand what sort of a person he is.
I think a lot of people are real dumb because we understand Jimmy. I think it's the difference in the part of the country you're from, but I don't see why everybody can understand him. He makes everything so plain to me.
Has he got any particular bad habits that you're going to tell him to say, when you get to the White House, be careful about that?
No, Jimmy has no bad habits. This is funny. Everybody's tried to find out something bad about Jimmy. It's impossible. There's just nothing bad about him.
Right.
And I'm not just as prejudiced. You can ask everybody who comes to this church or who's in town.
Is it true to say, though, he's a rather complicated person?
I think everybody says that about him, but really, to me, he's not complicated. He's just plain old Jimmy. Even when he gets in the White House, he'll just be little Jimmy to me, don't you know? It's hard to ask a mother these questions.
The way Carter puts across his policies without the fervor and rhetoric expected of most American hopefuls at the hustings has misled some observers who claim that he's vague. Not so. The Carter position's clear. On foreign relations, he says it's not America's role to be an international superman, interfering overseas. He plans to reduce America's military involvement abroad. At home, he wants a national health scheme and tighter tax curbs on big business. He's also strong on community projects, and he'd like to revitalize the railroads. But all these are views that Carter can't have spelt out well enough for the man in the street. For they still ask, does Carter simply want us to take him on trust?
Well, back to the earlier issue, fuzziness question, I think to an extent that's true, but because, I think that is the basis of Carter's perception of the mood of the country, that people want to believe in the integrity of a presidential candidate beyond everything else. So in a sense, he's saying, trust me. But beyond that, I think you've got to add that Carter, after all, is a man with a rather lengthy public record. He's not been in Washington. I think that's one reason that some Americans who think of national politics as Washington-based find it hard to feel they know Carter. But nonetheless, he, after all, as I pointed out, he came to the state senate in Georgia more than a dozen years ago. He ran 2 statewide campaigns in this state. He was a very active, aggressive governor. He's been running for president for 24 months, in the way of an almost active campaign. He said things about issues. He's got a public record. As a chief executive of a large state, he made not just dozens or hundreds, but thousands of decisions that spelled out his philosophy about government, that had actual practical effects. I suspect before the campaign is over that Americans will feel like they know Governor Carter a good deal better than they might feel right now.
There's a great hunger in this country to repair the damage that's been done to our country by the Vietnamese War, by Watergate tragedy, by the CIA revelations. There's a desire in our country for unity of purpose, and I think that the nation's been looking for someone like myself around whom they could coalesce a common effort. So people still retain their individuality, their special interest commitments, but I think they're willing to look to a leader who can harness the best that's in our people, maybe without the divisiveness that has been a part of our nation's government in recent years.